At 18, Maya Robinson stood at the threshold of her future, clutching a thin folder that carried her dreams inside. She was dressed in her Sunday best, pressed blazer, polished shoes, a hopeful heart beating fast beneath her chest. She had spent 4 years building herself into the perfect scholarship candidate. Valedictorian, debate captain, community volunteer, the first in her family to ever apply to college. And now she found herself seated across from a white dean in a sunlit office filled with books, plaques, and silent judgment. The conversation began pleasantly enough. He smiled, asked about her goals, nodded politely as she spoke of becoming an educator, of wanting to give back to her community. But then came the moment that split her life in two. Without hesitation, and with a tone so casual it almost sounded rehearsed, he said, "You're very impressive, Maya, but unfortunately, we've already filled our diversity quota for this year." For a second, she didn't understand. How could she not be enough when she had done everything right? But as the words sank in, her heart sank with them. It wasn't about her grades or her drive. It was about the color of her skin. That moment, quiet and cruel, should have crushed her. But instead, something fierce and silent ignited inside. She thanked him, stood up, and walked out, but not defeated. She walked out determined. What that dean didn't know, what he never could have imagined, was that he wasn't turning her away from opportunity. He was handing her a reason to fight harder than ever before. And the twist, 33 years later, the very student he had denied would return to that same university. Not to beg for validation, not to demand an apology, but to lead. Maya Robinson, the girl once told she didn't fit the mold, would become the university's president. The same campus that turned its back on her would one day hang her portrait in the Hall of Leaders. And yes, the same dean, retired now, grayer, slower, sitting in the audience, would have to watch as she delivered the keynote address he never imagined she'd give. But this story isn't just about a stunning reversal. It's about the invisible battles millions silently endure, the rejections masked as policy, the doors closed under the pretense of standards. It's about the systems that decide who's worthy before they even listen. And more importantly, it's about what happens when someone refuses to accept that verdict. Maya didn't succeed out of spite. She rose out of belief. Belief that she could make the system better from within. Belief that the next Maya wouldn't be told she's too late for her own dream. This isn't just her story, it's a mirror. Because maybe you've heard a no that didn't make sense. Maybe you felt small in a room built to overlook you. If so, stay with us. Because the journey you're about to witness will show you what happens when quiet strength outlasts loud rejection, and when the denied return not to knock, but to hold the door open for others. Maya Robinson still remembers the way the light filtered through the tall windows of the admissions building that day, the way it danced across the dean's polished desk, the way it cast long shadows behind her chair, almost as if something was closing in. She had rehearsed everything, her answers, her posture, even her smile. This was the final interview, the one that would decide whether she received a full-ride scholarship to the school she had dreamed of since she was 13. Her mother had worked double shifts for months just to buy her that outfit. Her father had borrowed a neighbor's car so she wouldn't have to take the bus. And now, here she was, sitting in a room that smelled faintly of old books and fresh disappointment. The dean, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a reputation for being traditional, skimmed her application with disinterest. Every now and then, he would glance up and offer a tight-lipped smile, the kind people give when they've already made up their mind. Maya's voice was steady, but her stomach churned. She talked about her dream of becoming a teacher, how she wanted to give kids like her, kids who grew up in neighborhoods with more liquor stores than libraries, a shot at a better future. She mentioned her volunteer work, the literacy program she'd started at her church, her straight A's, her AP scores, her debate team trophies. But nothing seemed to land. The dean leaned back in his leather chair, folded his hands, and said, almost kindly, "You've clearly worked hard, Maya. But I have to be honest, we've already met our diversity numbers for this cycle." For a heartbeat, the room was silent. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "I'm sorry," she asked, trying to keep her voice from cracking. "We've already filled the available spots in our minority scholarship program," he said, as if it were a weather report, as if it had nothing to do with her. "You're more than qualified, but the funding's limited. Maybe next year." That last sentence broke something in her. He wasn't even saying no because she wasn't good enough. He was saying no because someone who looked like her had already been chosen. As if opportunity came with a skin tone quota. She nodded slowly, swallowed hard, thanked him for his time, and walked out. She didn't cry. Not in the hallway, not outside the building. Not until she got back to the car and saw her father's hopeful face in the rearview mirror. Then the tears came hot, furious, ashamed. "What happened, baby?" he asked gently. She couldn't find the words. How do you explain to someone that your future just got priced out by your pigment? That no matter how hard you worked, you were still seen as a box on a form, a check mark in someone else's progress report. That night Maya didn't eat. She didn't speak. She sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed, replaying the interview over and over in her mind, wondering if she could have said something differently, smiled more, sat straighter, begged harder. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had done everything right. And still, it wasn't enough. That's the part that stays with you, not the rejection itself, but the injustice of it. The quiet, civil way you're dismissed without ever being seen. The way your name gets filed away while someone else, someone more fitting, walks through the door you were born outside of. For the next few weeks, Maya floated. Not quite depressed, not quite okay, just numb. Her friends celebrated their acceptances. Teachers patted her on the shoulder and said things like, "It's their loss," which felt hollow. She started to question everything. Was she chasing the wrong dream? Was the system ever meant for her in the first place? But then something changed. One afternoon, as she was shelving books at the local library, a little girl about 8 years old tugged on her sleeve and asked, "Miss Maya, are you gonna be our teacher one day?" It was innocent, sweet, but it shook her, because in that child's eyes she already was someone who mattered. And just like that, Maya made a decision. If no one was going to give her a seat at the table, she would build her own. If the door was locked, she'd find a window or break down the wall entirely. She found a small local college that offered her a partial scholarship. She took 2 jobs, commuted 4 hours a day, and studied by the light of vending machines between shifts. She sacrificed sleep, comfort, and social life, not out of bitterness, but because she believed in something bigger than the rejection. She believed that one no wasn't the end of her story, it was just the beginning of a better one. And that dean, that polite dismissal, it wouldn't be forgotten, not out of spite, but because it would one day serve as a reminder that no one gets to define your worth. Not a form, not a policy, not a face behind a desk with a quota to fill. Maya knew one day she'd come back, not for validation, but for change. Not to prove him wrong, but to prove herself right. Maya didn't rise in one glorious leap. There was no grand turning point, no cinematic moment where everything magically turned around. Her climb was quiet, often invisible, and painfully slow. After the rejection, she enrolled in a small community college 2 towns over, the only place that offered her even a partial scholarship. There was no ivy on the walls, no historic halls filled with tradition, no grand library with vaulted ceilings. Just concrete buildings, cheap plastic chairs, and classrooms that smelled like leftover coffee and tired dreams. But Maya showed up, every day, every class, every shift at her two part-time jobs. She cleaned tables at a diner from 5 a.m. until 9 a.m., took the bus straight to campus, attended lectures until 4 p.m., and then worked evenings at a grocery store until closing. She studied on the back of receipts on bus rides home, under the dull hum of fluorescent lights. Her life became a cycle of exhaustion and hope, barely sleeping, constantly grinding, and always wondering if it was worth it. But even when doubt whispered in her ear, telling her to quit to settle, she remembered that little girl in the library who saw a teacher in her eyes. That image became her anchor. There were days when Maya felt invisible. In classes, professors sometimes overlooked her when she raised her hand. Customers at the diner called her sweetheart or honey in that condescending tone that made her skin crawl. Even other students assumed she was only there because of some affirmative action box they thought she checked. She didn't argue. She didn't try to prove anything to them. Instead, she let her work speak. Straight A's, honors list, invited to speak at student events, not because anyone handed her the mic, but because she took the stage even when no one was looking. And slowly, people started to notice. One of her professors, a black woman named Dr. Janice Hill, saw something in Maya she hadn't seen in a long time: fire. Not just the ambition to succeed, but the fire to serve, to lead, to change things from the inside. Dr. Hill became Maya's first mentor, her first real ally in academia. She helped her transfer to a better university after 2 years, one with more resources, more challenges, and, ironically, the same circles of subtle exclusion. But by then, Maya had grown sharper. She had learned to read the room, to navigate the unspoken codes, to assert herself without apology. She applied for internships nobody told her about, showed up to office hours others avoided, created a mentorship group for first-gen students of color. And every time someone tried to underestimate her, she leaned in harder. She didn't aim to be exceptional to prove a point. She aimed to be herself, fully, unapologetically, and loudly. Still, the fight wasn't just academic. It was deeply personal. Her family struggled. Her mother got sick. Her younger brother got into trouble. Bills piled up. There were weeks she went hungry so she could pay for textbooks. Nights she cried herself to sleep, clutching her financial aid rejection letters, wondering if she was chasing something that didn't want her. But each obstacle became part of her training. While others learned theory in class, Maya was living the real-life version of every case study. She knew the system, not just how it worked, but how it failed people like her. And instead of becoming bitter, she became strategic. After graduation, she didn't go corporate. She went into education. Started as a middle school teacher in an underserved district where most students didn't expect to finish high school, let alone college. She saw herself in their eyes, in the way they shrunk their dreams to fit the world around them, and she refused to let that happen. Maya poured everything into her work, built programs, got grants, organized parent nights, taught after school, on weekends, in churches, in community centers. And when people told her she was doing too much, she kept going. Because she wasn't just teaching, she was planting seeds. And some of those seeds, they grew. Years passed. Maya earned her Master's, then her doctorate working full-time, studying at night. She published articles, spoke at conferences, and slowly rose through the ranks, from teacher to principal, from principal to director, from director to professor, and eventually, inevitably, to associate dean. Along the way, she kept every rejection letter she ever received, not out of bitterness, but as a map of how far she'd come. She framed the first one, the one that started it all, the dean's letter. the "we regret to inform you" line that changed everything. Because by then it was no longer a wound, it was a landmark, proof that her story didn't end where someone else said it should. And deep down, she knew she wasn't done yet. There was still one place she had left to go, back to where it all began. By the time Maya reached her mid-30s, something had shifted, not just in her resume, but in her presence. She walked into rooms differently now. Shoulders square, eyes steady, words deliberate. People listened when she spoke, not because of her title, but because of the quiet power she carried, earned, not given. Every small win she had gathered along the way had become a stone in the foundation she was building, one that now held weight far beyond her own story. At the university where she taught, Maya wasn't just another academic in a faculty directory. She was a voice that opened doors, sometimes without even needing to knock. She didn't seek attention, but students sought her, especially those who felt invisible, first-generation students, students of color, women who had been told their ideas were too emotional or not scholarly enough. She made space for them, created an unofficial open-door policy long before it was printed in any department handbook. Her office became a sanctuary, a place where students cried, vented, dreamed, and planned. And slowly, Maya began to see something she hadn't always believed in: change. Not sweeping, not fast, but real. One student got accepted into a graduate program because of the reference letter she wrote. Another started a nonprofit after Maya helped her outline a grant proposal. A young man, once on the brink of dropping out, stayed because of a single sentence she told him. "You don't have to shrink to fit this place, make this place stretch to fit you." These weren't viral moments. They weren't on the news, but they mattered. Each life she touched became a ripple, and she was building a quiet revolution. One student, one conversation, one nudge at a time. Outside the classroom, Maya pushed further. She joined committees most people avoided, the boring ones that determined hiring practices, curriculum guidelines, budget decisions. Why? Because she knew that if you weren't at the table, you were on the menu. She fought for inclusive hiring, transparent scholarship criteria, and courses that reflected more than just a Eurocentric view of knowledge. She challenged tenure norms that rewarded familiarity over innovation. And she did it with the same grace and tenacity she'd learned working double shifts and riding night buses years ago. But her biggest breakthrough came from the smallest moment. During a faculty retreat, a senior administrator, older white male of course, offhandedly remarked, "We need more diverse leadership, but it's hard to find candidates who are both qualified and a good fit." The room laughed politely. Maya didn't. Instead, she said calmly, "Maybe we should rethink what we call a good fit. Sometimes the system keeps planting roses and wonders why nothing else grows." The room went silent, not hostile, just thoughtful. And in that moment, Maya realized her voice wasn't just being tolerated anymore, it was being considered. From there, opportunities grew. She was invited to speak on education equity panels, published in national journals, consulted by public school districts. A foundation offered her a grant to build a mentorship pipeline for underrepresented educators. At first, she hesitated. She was still teaching full-time, still navigating politics, still showing up for students every day. But then she thought about who she used to be, the girl sitting in the admissions office, being told she was impressive, but not enough. And she knew she didn't just owe it to herself. She owed it to every young Maya out there still waiting for someone to believe in them. So she accepted. And the program she built didn't just help students. It developed future principals, district leaders, even faculty members. She had gone from survivor of the system to architect of something better. And yet, through it all, she never stopped remembering where it started. That letter, that rejection, That moment of quiet humiliation. She never shared it publicly, not yet. But she kept it, folded neatly in a drawer beneath her most important papers. Not because it defined her, but because it reminded her of the day she stopped waiting for permission to belong. And as her name began appearing in conference brochures and education journals, people started asking questions. Who is this woman shaking up the system with such calm fire? Where did she come from? How did she get here? The answer was simple but powerful. She came from where doors were closed, and now she was building hallways. Still, Maya knew something was coming. The winds had stacked up, the vision had expanded. But there was one place she hadn't returned to yet. One institution, one name, one memory still waiting to be confronted. Not for revenge, not even for closure, but for something bigger, a reckoning, a return. And without knowing exactly when, Maya felt it, on the horizon, in the air, in the way people spoke her name in certain rooms. That call was coming. And this time, she would walk through the front door with nothing to prove and everything to build. The email came on an ordinary Tuesday. The subject line was unassuming: leadership opportunity, internal recommendation. But Maya's hand froze on the mouse before she even opened it. The message was brief, formal, and almost clinical. The university's presidential search committee was inviting her to apply for the position of university president. At first, she thought it was a mistake, or worse, a political move, something done to check a box, to make the selection process appear inclusive before handing the job to someone already pre-picked from within the old boys network. But then she read the names, the committee members, the tone, the part that said, "You've been strongly recommended by multiple departments as a candidate of vision, depth, and proven impact." She read that sentence 5 times, and then she closed her laptop, got up, and walked outside. The fall air was sharp, golden leaves swirling around her feet. Students passed by laughing, earbuds in, backpacks slung carelessly over one shoulder, the same way she used to walk, silently rehearsing vocabulary quizzes in her head. This was the same campus that once rejected her before she could even begin, and now they were asking her to lead it. The irony made her chest tighten, not with pride, but with conflict. Maya had never chased titles. She had chased impact, change, integrity. Becoming president would mean stepping away from the students she mentored every day, leaving the classroom she loved, exchanging her grounded influence for bureaucracy, budget wars, and political landmines. Worse, it would mean becoming the face of an institution that had once looked her in the eye and told her she didn't belong. Could she really represent that? Could she lead a place that had once refused to see her as worthy? The questions weren't just political, they were deeply personal. For days she wrestled. She stayed up late rereading the offer, replaying old memories, sifting through doubt that came not from logic but from something deeper. The residue of rejection, the ghost of that dean's voice, the invisible weight of being a first, the only black woman in a room full of legacy surnames and generational privilege. What if she failed? What if she became the token they trotted out when convenient but ignored when she tried to push real change? What if they smiled in her face while quietly preparing her exit? These weren't paranoid fears. She had seen it happen before to women like her, pioneers who were celebrated publicly and sabotaged quietly. And yet beneath the fear something else stirred. Not ego, not ambition, but responsibility. Because if not her, then who? Who would fight to make sure students like she once was weren't quietly shut out? Who would challenge hiring panels still operating on invisible bias? Who would ask the uncomfortable questions at donor dinners and policy meetings? Who would rewrite the rules, not with a megaphone but with a pen and a seat at the head of the table? And if she said no, What message would that send to the young women she'd mentored for years? That fear still wins. That even when the door opens, we don't walk through it. One night, she sat alone in her apartment, the rejection letter from 33 years ago resting beside the presidential invitation. Two pieces of paper, one that closed a door, one that opened it, both in their own way had defined her. And as she looked at them side by side, she knew this wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. It was about transforming the institution, not to fit her, but to finally reflect the people it claimed to serve. The next morning, she accepted the nomination. The process wasn't easy. The vetting was intense. She sat through panels where her credentials were questioned more aggressively than her white counterparts. She answered loaded questions about objectivity, neutrality, and diversity fatigue. One trustee even asked, "How do you plan to lead without letting personal experiences bias your decisions?" Maya didn't flinch. She looked him in the eye and said, "Every leader brings personal experience. The only difference is some of us have had to survive systems that others were born into. That's not a bias, that's insight." The room went quiet, and that's when she knew this wasn't just a candidacy. It was a reckoning. Slowly, support grew. Not because she made promises, but because she made people listen. She didn't present herself as a savior. She presented herself as a builder of bridges, of systems, of futures. And then 6 months later, the vote came in. Unanimous. Maya Robinson was officially named president of the university that once turned her away. News outlets ran the story. Alumni whispered. Students erupted in celebration. But Maya, she simply stood in front of the mirror that morning, tied her scarf, breathed deeply, and whispered to her reflection, "Let's begin." Not with anger, not with pride, but with clarity, because the turning point wasn't the title. It was the decision to rise, not in spite of the past, but because of it. The day of her inauguration was crisp and quiet, the kind of morning that felt suspended in time, neither past nor future, just the weight of now pressing softly against her chest. The ceremony was held in the university's oldest hall, the same hall where generations of presidents had been sworn in, their portraits still watching from walls lined in heavy oak and silent history. Maya arrived early, before the crowd, before the cameras. She wanted a moment alone in the space that once excluded her, to stand where she had once been unseen, and let the weight of it all settle, not as a burden, but as a reminder. She ran her fingers along the edge of the podium. The wood was polished smooth, like everything else in this place, refined, elegant, and never designed with her in mind. But here she was. Her name was already etched onto the program. Her story printed in the alumni magazine. Her voice about to echo through the same halls that had once silenced it. And then someone called her name, softly, almost uncertainly. "Maya," she turned. He was older now, of course, thinner, stooped, his hair fully white. But she knew immediately. His voice hadn't changed. The man who had sat behind the desk 33 years ago, flipping through her file like she was a number he'd already tallied. Dean William Hargrove. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just a tan coat and a tie slightly off-center. There was no arrogance in his posture now, only a strange mix of hesitation and reverence, as if he wasn't sure whether he had the right to speak. I wasn't sure if I should come," he said, "but I heard about the presidency, about you." Maya's breath caught, not from anger but from something heavier. This was the man who, with one sentence, had set her on a completely different path. The man who once held the power to change her life and chose not to. "You remember," he said, almost as a question. "Of course I do," Maya replied, voice even. "You told me the diversity quota was full." He looked down, embarrassed. "I did, I said that, and I've thought about it more times than I can count." He met her eyes then, and for the first time she saw something she hadn't expected. Not guilt, not shame, but recognition. I've spent a long time wondering how many students I didn't see, how many doors I helped close without even realizing I was doing it. Maya didn't speak. She let him sit in the silence. It wasn't cruel, it was necessary. A reckoning not with her, but with himself. You didn't just survive what I did to you, he continued. You built something better, you led, you changed lives, and now you're about to lead the whole university. He paused. That's grace. And if you're willing, I'd like to say I'm sorry, not just for what I said, but for what I didn't see. Maya felt the sting in her eyes but blinked it away, not because she was trying to be strong, but because she was strong. Strong enough to stand here not as a wounded student but as a whole woman, a leader, a builder, and someone who no longer needed validation to know her worth. I accept your apology, she said. But more importantly, I hope you've spent the years doing more than just feeling sorry. I hope you've helped open doors for others. He nodded slowly. I've tried, he said. Not always perfectly, but I've tried. And for the first time in 33 years, Maya smiled at him, not with forgiveness, but with freedom. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't triumph. This was closure. A full circle drawn not with anger, but with purpose. Minutes later, the crowd began to fill in. Faculty, students, community leaders, even national press. As Maya stepped up to the stage, applause thundered around her. But she wasn't thinking about the cameras. She wasn't thinking about the title. She was thinking about the girl she once was, the one who sat outside that admissions office, waiting to be seen. Maya looked out at the crowd and said, 33 years ago, I was told I didn't belong here. Today, I'm here to say we belong, and we're not waiting for permission anymore. The room went still, then erupted. It was a moment not of victory, but of vision, because the full circle wasn't just about returning. It was about returning changed, returning ready, returning to rebuild. Long after the applause faded and the crowd dispersed, Maya sat alone in her office, the one with her name on the door, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the very campus that once rejected her. The silence was not empty, it was full of echoes of memory, of meaning. She thought about how far she had come, yes, but more importantly, how many others had helped her along the way. Her father's borrowed car, her mother's tired hands, Dr. Hill's mentorship, the students who trusted her before she even trusted herself, and the thousands of unseen hands that had carried her story forward, even when she was too exhausted to carry it alone. She didn't get here because she was exceptional. She got here because she refused to surrender to a system that only valued certain types of success. And now, as president, she didn't just want to lead an institution. She wanted to reimagine it, to rebuild it with voices that had long been silenced, to turn those sterile, selective gates into open doors. But Maya also knew something else, something more uncomfortable. Her story was rare, not because others weren't capable, but because the system still wasn't designed for them to make it through. For every Maya who climbed, there were dozens who fell, quietly, painfully, permanently. And that is the truth we must sit with. That talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. That systems don't break themselves, people do. And that real change isn't about symbolism, it's about structure, policy, power. So what does Maya's story ask of us? It asks us to listen to the voices we've overlooked, the students we've underestimated, the leaders we've dismissed before they ever had a chance. It asks us to remember that every rejection letter, every "you're not what we're looking for," carries weight. And that sometimes the greatest minds are hiding in plain sight, waiting for one person to say, I see you. It asks us to stop assuming the door is enough just because it's open and start asking, who feels welcome to walk through it, and who's still standing outside, wondering if they're allowed to knock. Most of all, it asks us not just to celebrate Maya, but to become her, in whatever way we can. You don't need to be a university president to make change. You just need to pay attention, speak up, mentor someone, challenge that safe policy that quietly excludes. Rewrite the narrative one brave action at a time, because maybe you're a Maya, or maybe you're the person who once said no to someone like her. Either way, this is your moment to reflect, to rise, to reach back and pull someone forward. Because in the end, Maya's story isn't just about coming full circle. It's about breaking the circle entirely and building something better in its place.